All right, today we're going to unpack a huge but kind of quiet power play happening in the global energy market. It's the story of how India, one of the fastest growing economies on the planet, is trying to secure its future by making a massive bet on a partner that's thousands of miles away.
So it all kicks off with a really basic need. For millions and millions of homes and businesses all across India, liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, isn't some luxury. It's the fuel that powers daily life, and the country's need for it is just growing like crazy.
Just how big are we talking? Well, get this. In the last fiscal year alone, India used up a staggering 31.3 million metric tons of LPG. That is a colossal amount of energy needed to keep a nation on the move. And that really brings us to the heart of the story. When your entire country depends that much on one single thing, where you get it from becomes absolutely critical. So what happens when your supply chain is all jammed up in just one region of the world? The answer? You make a really bold strategic play to mix things up. You look clear across the globe for a new partner, and that's exactly what India did. So let's break this whole thing down. Okay, first things first. To really get why this is such a big deal, you have to understand the sheer scale of India's demand. It's just off the charts. I mean, just look at these numbers. Consumption jumps from about 21.6 million metric tons in 2017 to over 31 million today. And it's not slowing down. It could hit 34 million tons next year. This is like a runaway train of energy demand, and it absolutely has to be fed. So what's driving all this? Well, it's really two big things. First, you've got these really successful government programs that have given more households access to gas, and people are refilling their cylinders more often. But it's not just kitchens anymore. Commercial and industrial use has shot up from 10% to around 16% of all demand. We're talking restaurants, factories, the whole economic engine. Now, all that soaring demand has a huge consequence. India's own production just can't keep up. And this shows you exactly what happened. In just a few years, India's reliance on foreign LPG jumped from 51% to a critical 66%. That means 2/3 of their entire supply now has to come from somewhere else. Right? And this is where things get really interesting. When you're importing 2/3 of something this vital, the question of who you're buying it from suddenly becomes a massive national security issue. So, let's ask the obvious question. With all this gas flowing into the country, where were all those tankers sailing from? And here is the answer. It's, wow, an incredible 91 to 93% of all of India's LPG imports were coming from just 4 countries in the Middle East. The UAE by itself was 41%. I mean, this is the textbook definition of putting all your eggs in one basket.
And that brings us to a really important idea called concentration risk. Think about it like this. What if your town only had one supermarket? If it suddenly shut down, even for a week, you'd be in serious trouble, right? Well, it's the exact same idea, just on a global scale. Relying too much on one spot makes you incredibly vulnerable.
And look, we're not just talking theory here. This over-reliance put India in a really tight spot. It exposed them to any supply disruptions in that region, made them vulnerable to shipping bottlenecks and crowded sea lanes, and it just gave them very little wiggle room if they suddenly needed more gas on short notice.
So, faced with this growing risk, India's energy strategists knew they had to do something big. They needed another option. They needed a plan B.
The solution was to look way beyond their usual neighborhood, to a partner that was geopolitically completely different and could offer some long-term stability. They looked all the way across the world, to the United States.
And they didn't just test the waters. They went all in, signing a huge long-term agreement for 2.2 million metric tons of LPG every single year from the US. This wasn't just buying a little extra gas. This was a fundamental, strategic overhaul of their entire import plan.
And when you break it down, the strategy here is just crystal clear. Step 1, recognize you're way too reliant on one place. Step 2, lock in a stable supply with a long-term contract. Step 3, open up a whole new supply route from a different part of the world. And the end result of all that? A huge boost to their national energy security. But, of course, a move this big isn't simple. It's not without its own set of challenges. It introduces a whole new kind of calculation, a trade-off between cost and security. Yeah, this lays it out perfectly. What India is really doing here is trading one kind of risk for another. They're swapping the geopolitical concentration risk of being tied to the Middle East for a new challenge, freight cost sensitivity. I mean, the US is a lot farther away, so shipping is going to be a much bigger piece of the final price. They're giving up the advantage of proximity to gain the much bigger advantage of diversification.
And you know, the analysts who studied this deal all pretty much agree. This move is a total game changer. It's creating an energy landscape for India that's way more balanced and, at the end of the day, a whole lot more resilient to whatever the world throws at it.
So, what's the big picture here? What does this all mean when we zoom out and look at the future?
What this all boils down to is that India has basically written a whole new playbook for its energy future. It dramatically cuts down their dependence on one single region, and it sets up the US supply as a new, stable anchor. This whole thing builds a supply chain that's just tougher and much better prepared for future challenges.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. In a world that seems to get more and more uncertain, is this strategic diversification, this idea of trading convenience for security, the new blueprint for how nations will have to secure their energy? It's a huge question, and one a lot of countries around the world are probably asking themselves right now.